Hey there, welcome to Landlord Gurus. I'm Chris. I have Eli here, and we had a couple episodes recently that talked about whether you should hire a property manager or not and what some of those costs might be. Today, we are going to talk about some of those experiences that Eli has had with a property manager. It's been, from what I understand, a interesting experience or eye-opening to say the least. So yeah, Eli, why did you hire a property manager to begin with?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So first off was the factor that the property is a 3-hour drive away from here. So I have managed it for 15, 17 years ever since we purchased the place. And I rehabbed it and, improved every single unit. And it was operating quite nicely. But I got to the spot where I was busy with my family and felt like I didn't have the time, but more so I wanted to be really careful that I was following the local rules, which are hard to keep up with, and also keeping up with the rents. So I wasn't paying quite enough attention, I think is the gist of it. And I wanted to see, well, should I open myself up?
Those are all viable reasons, like we talked about before, especially with knowing the local rules. It's something that a good property manager can bring to the table and understanding the market to get you the best rents and basically keep it as occupied as possible without too much vacancy. Yeah. Okay. So you did that. And I guess, how was that experience? How has it been for you?
So this was about 3 years ago and it began during the pandemic. So it started off pretty well and actually went fairly well for the first year and a half or so. And part of that's that not a lot happened. Part of that is that the labor shortage was an issue when they started coming back. I think they had a hard time getting good people.
I'm sorry to interrupt. When you started with them, all the units were fully occupied at that point, right?
They were fully occupied. Fairly briefly thereafter, I had one that had to be rented up. And actually, maybe, Chris, that's a spot where I should chime in about what this was costing me.
Yeah. And
So,
what you had signed up for them to do.
right. Yeah. And they were very transparent, which I would absolutely recommend that anybody considering this be really clear and ask about every single fee that they're likely to be charged. The top line, the big expenses were the monthly management fees that were 8% right off the top of gross rents. And that's a pretty decent deal in a somewhat expensive metro like this. It could easily be 10%. Single families could maybe even be higher. And then they do charge a 50% rent up fee. So at any turnover, if it's a $1,500 apartment, it costs me $750 to fill it.
Right.
And they do renewal fees of, I think it's about $200. There are some small admin fees that come through at about $5 a piece. I don't fully remember what they are. They're trip fees and for maintenance and the agents. And then there are also some markup fees on top of expenses that they put out on behalf of me. And for larger repairs, I think that there's a management fee, which, might be $50 to manage a dishwasher repair or something.
Right. Okay.
So there are layers and it adds
Yeah,
up.
yeah, definitely. Okay. It's good to know that to definitely take a look at what they're charging. They all add up.
They were paying for themselves. I have to say that the rents that did move up, and of course that follow through on their part, that's what the property would bear, which was, by our creation. But, they improved the gross rents as they renewed and leased up so that it was more than covering the fees. So at any rate, that is to say the first year and a half or so went pretty well. I was okay with the expenses and, things were going pretty smoothly.
Yeah. Okay. And then what changed?
So the factors that changed are the variables that I think are the biggest issues when you're looking at hiring a property manager. Are they filling vacancies with good tenants quickly? And are they managing maintenance and upkeep matters to the satisfaction of the tenants and also in a reasonable way in terms of how much it costs, making good decisions. So both of those things went downhill after that initial year and a half. So
You were having some issues with the roof, I believe. Is that right? And you'd ask them to take care of some patching or things like that. Is that right?
Yeah. So this was a concrete garage and there was a low tech roof. I was basically tar and it had been redone years ago and it needed to be redone or at least patched. So they sent somebody out and I can't remember frankly what they got back to me, but it was ridiculous. And I said, no, thanks. And then I went and got my own contractor, a handy person that I'd used before. And I said, well, have them go out. So there I am managing.
Yeah. You're
managing
doing it yourself then, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Got it.
and
Okay.
it was a third of the cost or something to that effect.
Wow. Okay. So they just didn't have the same I guess, attention to the price, or, they were the people they were using. They were just taking that estimate kind of at face value without sort of shopping it around or really understanding what the true cost might actually be.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky thing to have the kind of the embedded interest that you have as an owner. Property managers will try to do that, but it's a different thing. And also, you do need somebody involved who knows enough about maintenance that they can triage a bit upfront, even just by phone or photos, so that they send the most effective vendor first. And so you can either know that like I do, or have good resources in terms of a trusted handy person. And that's kind of the best of both worlds. It's somebody you can call on.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so you basically took care of the roof thing yourself. You also had some issues, and there's some flooding in one of the apartments as well.
Yeah, we had a big freeze over the winter, and a pipe burst in a laundry room, which was inside but not insulated. And so it flooded the basement unit, which was all carpet on concrete. So I know from experience that you've got to lift the carpet and get a fan under it so that it dries everything out before the trapped water starts to mildew. But I had to tell them that. And
I assume the tenant contacted the property manager when they first noticed the issue.
They did. Yep. And then I think the property managers asked me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, you got to get it dry. So they sent a vendor out, and the vendor said, well, we can go and do something and it'll cost $1,000. And that was just an estimate, but it'll cost starting at $1,000 was basically what it was.
And with your knowledge, you knew that could be done for a lot less.
Yeah, I said, here's a link to the $129 floor drying fan at Home Depot. Please go get it. Have your maintenance people take it down, lift up the edge of the carpet, and stick it underneath, and keep blowing until it's dry. Yeah. So they said, oh, great idea. But that still took 10 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And to be fair, everything was frozen. Everything was a mess. There were problems all over the place. So some of it's understandable, but the communication wasn't good with me or with the tenant.
Right. I mean, and after 10 days, then I assume mildew and mold had already started to settle in.
Yeah, it never cropped up as an issue, but there's definitely a risk of that for sure.
And then did you end up eventually at the end of the day just ripping out the carpet and putting new flooring in, or am I getting stories confused?
And they're not related, but they did happen close to each other. So a few months later, early this year, I had a vacancy that tenant moved out after 12 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he'd been a great tenant. The place was in great shape, but the carpet was 12 years old. So I decided, all right, well, we're going to put down a luxury vinyl plank flooring, which is all the rage and is great, durable stuff, I have to say.
Affordable.
Yeah. So I said, okay, well, let's get that stuff out of there. So I went down there, being a person who likes to control big decisions like this. And I went to the flooring store, and I picked out the stuff, and I got a list of vendors from them, and they showed me a couple that they thought might be good. And I called around, and I found somebody that seemed really reasonable. And then I put them in contact with the property manager so that he could get access to go and estimate the labor part of it. Well, we had snafu after snafu, and the keys weren't there the first time. They put a code out the second time, but it didn't work. Or they didn't clarify the right door. And there was, some error on his part, but he couldn't get a hold of them either. So then he said, understandably, thanks, but no thanks. This is too much of a hassle. So,
wow. Yeah. It's understandable. I mean, cost him a couple trips out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that in this market, he did the second one is amazing.
Actually. Right. And all that could have been avoided with a property manager who was responsive, or at least, a little bit more.
On top of it, they'd moved the keys for some reason that I still don't know.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you had to be involved kind of on all these issues, along the way, as if you were managing it yourself, more or less, not 100%, but.
Yeah. My choice to go and choose the flooring. Yeah. And anytime the client gets involved with somebody else's job, multiple parties involved. So I knew that, but I tried to be careful about it, but they were not on top of it, and it didn't go well. I had to do more than I should have had to by far. And
my guess is this delayed the installation of the project and probably kept it unoccupied for longer than you would have liked. And that cost you money. 2, 3, 4 months probably by the time we got it figured out, because I escalated things then, and I ended up with the general manager, and she said, well, we got to get this fixed. So we worked together, and she was very responsive, and they said, well, our maintenance person can put it in and they can start on Monday. And I said, well, great. And they'd estimated $1,200. I didn't know until a month later that it was costing me $3,800. Oh, wow. I'm sorry, $2,800. It's not quite that outrageous. Still,
it was over double.
Wow. Okay. And that's using somebody in-house even. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another interesting issue with property managers that you might sign off on a project and then give them full access, but you might not know the total cost until the end. Or in a lot of cases, any repair that is below a certain threshold, they do not have to get your approval.
Yeah.
So you don't know about it until after it's done, and then it adds up. If there's, multiple that are all below the threshold, that's kind of a lot.
Yeah, that adds up. The bigger issues for me have been the big things. So, yeah.
Yeah. But just another
And
nothing to be aware of. Again, back to the costs. There are a lot of things that come up and that seem to crop up.
well, right. And I guess that's a good thing to acknowledge is that not only are there costs of the property manager, there can be associated costs with things not being done the most effective way. And then to move on, then that unit was ready to be leased. And I'll air quote the ready. A month or a month and a half later, we'd done some painting. We put the place in really nice shape. And they said, okay, well, we're ready to go. This is, here's the price we think. And it was a lot. It was double what I had been getting before I hired the property manager.
Oh, wow.
And I was clearly quite low on that one. So I said, well, great, go to it. And they'd report every week and they weren't getting many leads and they weren't getting any applicants. So they would report to me each week and we moved the rent down a couple of times. And then eventually I said, okay, well, I'm going to go down and I'm going to see what is going on. And I had another project to do there as well. So I got there and there's some stairs down. It's concrete and stairs down with a roof and there were cobwebs and the stairs had leaves on them and dusty. And then it came in and people clearly been tracking all that stuff in and it just wasn't clean. I don't know if it had been cleaned poorly. It was very poorly cleaned if it was cleaned at all. My guess would have been no.
Wow.
So
we've talked about this before when we've talked about, how to show your listings and how to make it presentable. And, all this matters. Yeah. It's the first impression that these potential tenants see. And if it's not clean, if it's just in a state of disrepair, it's just a bad impression and sets a bad precedent too.
Well, right. Are you going to get somebody who thinks that that's what they deserve?
Right.
Or that is comfortable with that level of crime?
Right.
That's not good for the property long term. So there were a couple of other things. The backyard was a mess. And so I sent them a list of things to do. I talked to the other tenants and I sent them a list of the things that they had wanted and asked them and followed through to get all that stuff done. And sure enough, a week later, the place had an applicant that they had accepted. One other change, though, was that in the other units, they have implemented, with my consent, a pet policy. And it's under 45 pounds and there's some restrictions and they do this thing called pet screening. And I generally don't take pets. I allow them to do that. And I think you can get better revenue when you do that carefully. But they hadn't advertised this unit, which is a basement unit and the most hardy, impervious to damage of any of the units. So of any unit, it would have been the best one to have a pet. And for some reason, they hadn't done it there. And I didn't know that. And so that, I think, made as much difference as anything else.
Yeah.
So at any rate, things that have fallen apart.
Yeah. It seems like there's just a level of attention that has kind of fallen down, which, I guess it can happen, but it seems like if they are managing multiple properties and they got a lot of things to do, and especially like you mentioned earlier with labor shortages, it just might be hard for property managers to stay on top of everything that they're supposed to. And that's not an excuse, but I think it's just the reality that is what's happening.
We all know this is a hard job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was why I hired them. And I think labor shortage and coming out of the pandemic, there are some ways that I'm sympathetic. And I don't think that every property manager or even necessarily this company over the long haul is really just inherently problematic. But you have to know everything you're getting into. And ultimately, it's more efficient to manage your own because you got a minimum of 8 to 10% of your gross revenue right off the top. And that's before anything else happens.
Right. Yep. Okay. So what's your takeaway from all this? What are your next steps? Are you going to keep with this property manager? Are you looking to take it on yourself or what next?
Well, I started talking to our realtor to consider moving doing a 1031 exchange of the investment to somewhere else closer where I can manage it. And as an aside, I'll say that it's in one of these tough markets where the laws are really onerous, and that's a factor for me too, but not enough by itself to, make me get out. So I think we probably aren't going to sell it right now for a number of reasons, but I think I will take it back in the next couple of months. And along with that, I'll need to dedicate the time to stay on top of the market. So I'm getting market rents on top of the laws so that I'm doing renewals correctly and lease up correctly, which I do here in Seattle. I have to stay on top of it. So I'm accepting that I have to do that if I take it back.
Got it. Okay. Well, yeah, all things to consider. It can be a tough choice, and we've got Eli's experience with that, which may help influence anyone's decision out there as well. So anyway, we'll wrap up there. Thanks for telling us your stories. It sounds not fun, but
It's been harrowing recently.
Yes, for sure. Okay. Yeah, if anyone else has any experiences like this, leave them in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories as well. Or if you've had a positive experience, let us know too. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. Like, subscribe, share.
Thanks.
Bye.